Before planes soared through the sky and highways stretched across continents, the world began to change on tracks of iron. Steel rails carved through landscapes, linking cities that had once taken days to reach by horse or boat. At the heart of this revolution were not just the trains themselves, but the places they arrived and departed from. Places that didn't merely connect destinations, but redefined how humans interacted with distance, time, and one another. These were the train stations. But not just any stations. The first stations, the oldest. The ones built when steam power was still new, when the idea of traveling hundreds of miles in a single day seemed like science fiction. In 5 extraordinary places across England and the United States, the modern world quietly began to take shape, brick by brick, rail by rail, and whistle by whistle. Before most people had ever seen a locomotive, these stations stood as temples to a new age. Their platforms hosted wide-eyed passengers, some frightened, some thrilled, all stepping into an era they barely understood. But which stations marked the beginning of it all? Which buildings stood at the edge of history and opened the doors to the future of travel? More importantly, what stories still echo within their aging walls? Behind the architecture and timetables lie forgotten rivalries, political gambles, groundbreaking engineering feats, and in some cases, tragic ends. From the majestic arches of London to the freight-borne bricks of Baltimore, these places were more than infrastructure. They were symbols of ambition, progress, and the human need to move faster, farther, freer. Though some still stand proudly, others have faded into obscurity, demolished or repurposed, remembered only by old maps and dusty archives. Yet each played a role in reshaping civilization itself. Train stations were more than buildings. They were revolutionary ideas turned into steel and stone. Before them, travel was slow, unpredictable, and expensive. But the advent of passenger rail meant mobility for the masses. For the first time in human history, ordinary people could journey hundreds of miles in a matter of hours. These stations became gateways to opportunity, engines of economic growth, and battlegrounds for industrial power. They changed how cities grew, how goods moved, how ideas spread. This is the untold, immersive story of the 5 oldest train stations in the world, the true birthplaces of modern travel. Long before America became a web of crisscrossing steel rails and roaring locomotives, there was a modest station in Baltimore that quietly ignited a revolution. In 1829, Mount Clair Station opened its doors, becoming the first passenger railway station in the United States and the beating heart of what would become the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, better known as the B&O. Nestled in the industrial district of Baltimore, surrounded by ironworks and warehouses, Mount Clair wasn't just a terminal. It was a daring experiment in a new kind of movement, one that would carry people and goods not by river or dusty roads, but on tracks drawn by machines. The idea of railroads in America was still in its infancy when the B&O was chartered in 1827. Visionaries in Baltimore were growing anxious about the rise of New York and Philadelphia as economic giants. The construction of the Erie Canal had given New York a new lifeline to the west, and Baltimore feared being left behind. The solution? A rail line that would cut through the Appalachians and connect the East Coast to the rich lands of the Ohio River Valley. The B&O was more than a business venture. It was a bold bet on technology not yet tested on such a scale. When Mount Clair opened, it marked the physical beginning of this grand experiment. At first, horse-drawn rail cars trotted along short wooden tracks, carrying curious passengers and light cargo. But within a year, steam would change everything. By 1830, the B&O introduced the Tom Thumb, the first American-built steam locomotive, which made its famous race against a horse-drawn car and lost only because of mechanical failure. Yet the point was made. Steam was the future. Mount Clair became the launchpad for this vision, expanding to include engine houses, maintenance shops, and increasingly complex infrastructure to support the growing demands of rail travel. It was here that America learned how to build, run, and maintain a railway system, not from Europe, but through its own industrial ingenuity. With every mile of track laid westward, Mount Clair remained the eastern anchor, a fixed point in a rapidly expanding frontier. Architecturally, the station was a mix of utility and understated elegance. The original buildings were made of brick, sturdy and modest, built to serve function over form. But even in its simplicity, Mount Clair was ahead of its time. It combined passenger facilities with administrative and mechanical buildings, creating a fully integrated railway campus. Over the decades, the site evolved. New structures were added, and the complex grew into a bustling hub. While most passengers in later years departed from larger terminals like Camden Station, Mount Clair remained the symbolic and operational core of the B&O network. By the mid-19th century, the B&O Railroad had stretched its reach hundreds of miles westward, surviving political turmoil, financial crises, and even the Civil War, during which its tracks became strategic assets contested by Union and Confederate forces. Through it all, Mount Clair stood its ground. It had become more than a station. It was the birthplace of an idea that would knit together a fractured nation. Immigrants, industrial workers, and traveling businessmen all passed through its grounds, often unaware they were treading on the soil of history. In time, larger and flashier stations would capture the public's imagination. New York's Grand Central Terminal, Chicago's Union Station. But Mount Clair never faded into obscurity. In fact, it transformed. As the golden age of rail gave way to automobiles and airplanes, the original station ceased its passenger services. But unlike so many early rail landmarks that were abandoned or demolished, Mount Clair found new life as a museum. In 1953, the B&O Railroad Museum was established on the site, turning this cradle of American railroading into a monument to its legacy. Today, the Mount Clair complex houses one of the most significant collections of railroad artifacts in the world. Locomotives from every era sit on the circular tracks of the old roundhouse. Historic rail cars, conductors' uniforms, communication tools, and thousands of photographs and documents fill its exhibits. Visitors walk through the same buildings where engineers once experimented with steam engines and blacksmiths forged parts by hand. You can stand on the original stretch of track laid in 1829, the first rails ever placed in the United States for public transportation. It's a living time capsule, a rare place where history isn't just observed but felt. Mount Clair's influence rippled far beyond Baltimore. It became the model for integrated rail operations across the country. The innovations in maintenance, scheduling, and track design pioneered there laid the groundwork for a transcontinental network. More than that, it helped shape America's very idea of progress. Cities that once relied on riverboats and wagons were suddenly within reach of urban centers. Goods moved faster, people moved further. The cultural and economic transformation that followed would be impossible to imagine without what began at Mount Clair. When we talk about the American railroad story, it's easy to get swept up in images of sleek silver trains roaring across the plains. But all that thunder began with a whisper, the soft hiss of steam from a little station in Baltimore, where men and women dared to believe in a future pulled not by horses, but by fire and iron. Mount Clair Station isn't just the oldest passenger station in the US. It's where America's journey into modernity began, mile by mile, wheel by wheel. In its bricks and rails lie the DNA of a nation that would soon span a continent. And though the locomotives have changed, the echoes of those first journeys still linger beneath the vaulted ceiling of the station that started it all. In the heart of industrial England, at a time when chimneys filled the sky with smoke and factories pulsed with steam-powered life, a revolution was quietly born, not in a palace or parliament, but in a railway station. In 1830, the world's first intercity passenger railway station opened at Liverpool Road in Manchester. Unlike the smaller or horse-drawn lines that had come before, this was the first time two major cities, Manchester and Liverpool, were linked by a railway designed specifically to carry passengers as well as freight. It was a groundbreaking moment, a leap forward not only in transport, but in how society itself would come to understand speed, connectivity, and mobility. At the core of this transformation stood the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, a marvel of ambition and engineering that rewrote the rules of the modern world. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway wasn't merely a convenience, it was a necessity born of urgency. During the early 19th century, Manchester's booming textile industry desperately needed faster access to Liverpool's thriving port. The existing routes, whether by canal or over the muddy, rutted roads, were agonizingly slow and increasingly inadequate. The idea of a railway had been proposed before, but it was George Stephenson, a former coal miner turned engineer, who would turn dreams into rails. Stephenson's appointment as the railway's chief engineer marked a pivotal turning point in transport history. He not only laid out the course for the railway, but also introduced pioneering methods of construction, including the use of cuttings, embankments, and tunnels that would become standard in railway building for decades to come. However, the railway's most iconic moment came before it was even completed. In 1829, the Rainhill Trials were held, a competition to determine which locomotive would pull passenger trains on the new line. 5 engines were entered, but it was Stephenson's rocket that stole the show. Weighing just over 4 tons and reaching speeds of up to 30 miles per hour, Rocket amazed spectators and solidified the promise of steam-powered intercity travel. The trials weren't just an engineering contest. They were a public spectacle, a symbol of Britain's new industrial might. When Rocket triumphed, it wasn't just Stephenson who won. It was the future itself. Liverpool Road Station, the Manchester terminus of this audacious railway, was equally remarkable. Unlike the Spartan depots of earlier rail systems, this was a fully realized passenger station. The buildings were elegant yet practical, built in Georgian style, with clean brick lines and functional layouts. Passengers entered through a courtyard and bought tickets inside the booking office before being led to the covered platforms. The entire design reflected something entirely new: the notion that train travel would become a regular, structured experience for the masses. Goods traffic was separated from passenger services, and the station included sidings, turntables, and warehouses to manage both people and products in motion. For the first time, travel wasn't reserved for the wealthy or the adventurous. It was organized, timetabled, and made accessible. The opening day of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway on September 15, 1830, was both triumphant and tragic. Dignitaries, engineers, and the curious public gathered for what was heralded as a historic moment. The inaugural journey included Prime Minister the Duke of Wellington and other notable figures, riding in carriages pulled by Stephenson's locomotives. The atmosphere was electric, full of anticipation and celebration. But midway through the journey, William Huskisson, a member of Parliament, stepped down onto the tracks to speak with the Duke and was struck and killed by an oncoming locomotive. It was the world's first railway passenger fatality, a sobering reminder of the power and danger of the new age. Yet even this tragedy could not stall the progress that had begun. The impact of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, and by extension, Liverpool Road Station, was immediate and profound. Travel between the two cities was cut from hours to just over 30 minutes. Goods, particularly raw cotton, could be transported with unprecedented speed, fueling Manchester's mills and feeding Liverpool's docks. But beyond commerce, the psychological shift was monumental. People began to rethink distance. Suddenly, workers could commute, letters could arrive same day, and newspapers could travel faster than ever before. The station became not just a physical terminal, but a symbol of progress, a place where the industrial future of Britain had arrived. As more railways were built across the United Kingdom, Liverpool Road Station became the prototype for dozens of others. Its layout was studied and copied, and its success became the blueprint for future rail hubs across Europe and the Americas. The influence of Stephenson's engineering extended far beyond Britain. His vision of rail as a public, passenger-serving system reshaped how the world moved. Yet while newer, larger stations took the spotlight, Liverpool Road quietly continued its operations. By the late 19th century, it was overshadowed by Manchester Victoria and Manchester Central, and passenger services were gradually withdrawn. Eventually, it shifted entirely to goods traffic, serving in that capacity well into the 20th century before being closed. Today, the site of the world's first intercity passenger station is preserved as part of the Science and Industry Museum in Manchester. Walking through its preserved buildings, visitors can see the original platforms, ticket offices, and even the old track alignment. The museum celebrates not just the engineering of the age, but the spirit of innovation that made it possible. Locomotives, carriages, and interactive exhibits bring the story to life, allowing guests to step into the shoes of those first travelers who boarded a train to somewhere new. The station stands as a testament to what can happen when bold ideas meet fearless execution. Manchester's Liverpool Road Station may not have the architectural grandeur of later Victorian terminals, but its historical weight is unmatched. It was here that the world discovered what was possible when people, power, and purpose aligned on a single track. The rumble of the rocket still echoes in its foundations, and the courage of those who built it still resonates with every visitor who walks its halls. It was not just the beginning of a railway. It was the beginning of a new way of living, of thinking, of connecting. And for that, Liverpool Road remains one of the most sacred grounds in the history of global transportation. In the city of Liverpool, where industry and innovation collided with the pulse of maritime power, one station quietly made history before fading almost entirely from public memory. Crown Street Station, opened in 1830, holds a distinction few places on Earth can claim. It was the world's first dedicated passenger railway station. While other sites, like Manchester's Liverpool Road, gained lasting fame, Crown Street was where the very idea of boarding a train for the sole purpose of traveling, not transporting goods, truly took root. It was the place where the railway met the everyday citizen, not just the industrialist or engineer. Yet, despite its groundbreaking purpose, Crown Street's life as a passenger station was short, and today, barely a trace remains. Its story is a fascinating one, a tale of ambition, experimentation, loss, and buried legacy. The early 19th century was a time of explosive technological experimentation. As the Liverpool and Manchester Railway took form, the need for distinct infrastructure to serve this new mode of transport became apparent. While freight had long dominated the thinking around railways, it became clear to visionaries like George Stephenson that rail could serve ordinary travelers as well. Crown Street was chosen as the Liverpool terminus for passenger service on the line, with the engineers facing a formidable challenge: how to get trains from the docks and city center over hilly terrain and into the station efficiently. The answer came in the form of the Wapping Tunnel, an engineering marvel for its time, and the first rail tunnel to be bored under a city. Stretching nearly 2 kilometers from the Liverpool docks to Edge Hill, it passed beneath the city, emerging near Crown Street. Because of the steep incline at the dock end, locomotives couldn't pull trains through the tunnel themselves. Instead, stationary steam engines used a continuous rope system to haul wagons up and down the slope. It was a bold, complicated system, but it worked, and it connected the heart of Liverpool with the broader intercity railway network. Crown Street Station opened on September 15th, 1830, the same historic day as the Liverpool and Manchester Railway's grand debut. A single, modest building greeted passengers, accompanied by a basic platform and a large open yard. It lacked the grand architecture or public gathering spaces of future stations, but it served its purpose with quiet distinction. The first passengers who boarded at Crown Street were entering a new era, one in which rail was not just the province of industry, but of the people. They were lawyers commuting to court, merchants heading to Manchester, and even the curious middle class eager to experience what the newspapers were calling the dawn of a new age. In those earliest years, Crown Street was a place of awe and curiosity. It symbolized speed, progress, and the magic of mechanical movement. People came not just to ride the trains, but to watch them. Just as today one might stand in awe beneath the roaring engines of an airport runway. But the station's location soon revealed its flaws. Crown Street was positioned outside Liverpool's bustling commercial center, requiring passengers to walk or ride carriages from the city to the station. While this might have worked for the adventurous or those with means, it quickly became clear that a more centrally located terminus would better serve the growing passenger demand. Within just 6 years, In 1836, Liverpool opened a new station, Lime Street, right in the heart of the city. Lime Street was larger, more accessible, and better suited to the needs of an urban population growing increasingly dependent on the railways for travel and commerce. As passenger services shifted to Lime Street, Crown Street's role diminished rapidly. By 1836, it had been closed to passengers altogether. Yet Crown Street's story didn't end with its closure. Rather than being demolished immediately, the site was repurposed for goods traffic. The adjacent Wapping Tunnel, with its connection to the docks, made it an ideal freight depot. For decades, Crown Street served as a goods terminal, its platforms filled not with passengers, but with crates, barrels, and wagons, loaded with the lifeblood of Liverpool's commerce. It became part of the city's invisible backbone, vital to economic life, but out of sight and largely out of mind for the average citizen. The building that once welcomed the world's first rail passengers became just another node in the vast web of Victorian logistics. Eventually, as freight needs evolved and road transport became dominant, Crown Street's relevance faded further. The structures deteriorated, and the station was ultimately demolished. Its memory slipped quietly from the city's consciousness. What Crown Street left behind, however, was more than bricks and mortar. It was a blueprint, a lesson in what the future would demand of railway stations. Its short life as a passenger hub taught engineers and planners the importance of accessibility, integration with urban centers, and the need for scalability. Crown Street proved that people would embrace rail travel, but only if it fit their lives conveniently. It also revealed the challenges of adapting industrial infrastructure for public use. The Wapping Tunnel, while innovative, imposed limits on train size and operation, limits that would inform future tunnel designs and gradient considerations. In these ways, Crown Street became an important testing ground, its lessons etched into the very DNA of railway planning in Britain and beyond. Today, very little remains of Crown Street Station. The site has been reclaimed by nature and time, with only scattered remnants hinting at its past. The entrance to the Wapping Tunnel still exists, sealed and silent, like the entrance to a long-forgotten crypt. In recent years, there have been archaeological digs and renewed interest in preserving what's left. Local historians and railway enthusiasts continue to fight for recognition, pushing for plaques, preservation, and educational outreach. To walk the area today is to tread on invisible tracks, ones that once carried the hopes, fears, and excitement of a society stepping into the unknown. Though Crown Street has been largely forgotten, its impact lives on in every train station built since. It was the first step in a journey that reshaped the world, even if it didn't survive to see where the journey led. In a way, that's fitting. Crown Street was never meant to be the end. It was the beginning, the prototype, the first brave attempt to merge technology with human experience. While its physical form may have vanished, the idea it birthed, the passenger railway station, has become one of the defining features of the modern age. And in that, Crown Street is immortal. In the heart of London, where modern skyscrapers rise beside Victorian facades and the city pulses with centuries of history, one railway station has stood at the crossroads of ambition, innovation, controversy, and resilience. Euston Station, opened in 1837, was not only London's first intercity railway terminal, it was a declaration. A bold architectural and logistical statement that the capital of the British Empire was now connected by iron rails to the industrial north. From its earliest days, Euston served as more than just a departure point. It symbolized a profound shift in British society, economy, and identity. It welcomed not only travelers and traders, but also ushered in an age where Londoners could reach Birmingham, Liverpool, or Manchester in mere hours, forging a network that tightened the threads of the United Kingdom itself. The opening of Euston marked the southern terminus of the London and Birmingham Railway, the country's first major trunk line. It was an engineering marvel for its time, a feat that required cutting through dense urban areas and coordinating with municipal authorities to make room for a transportation mode that had never before existed at such scale. The choice of Euston as the site was strategic. It sat just far enough north of the congested city center to allow for large-scale expansion, yet close enough to serve as a convenient gateway for travelers heading out of London. Its design was both functional and majestic, and at the center of that grandeur stood one of the most iconic pieces of railway architecture ever constructed: the Euston Arch. The Euston Arch was no ordinary entrance. Built in 1838 from solid stone and designed in the Doric style by architect Philip Hardwick, the arch soared nearly 70 feet high and stood like a Roman gateway into the age of rail. Inscribed simply with the word Euston, it conveyed a classical elegance and permanence that reflected the confidence of the railway age. It wasn't just a portal, it was a statement that the future had arrived. The station itself was built to accommodate the heavy locomotive traffic that would define Britain's growing rail network, with long platforms, waiting rooms, and dedicated facilities for luggage and mail. As traffic increased, so did Euston's footprint. The original station quickly underwent expansions, with additional platforms, canopies, and concourses added to support the explosive growth of long-distance rail travel. By the mid-19th century, Euston was the launchpad for the vast London and North Western Railway, linking the capital with cities throughout the Midlands and the North. The journey from London to Manchester, once a multi-day ordeal by coach, was reduced to hours. This revolution in mobility fundamentally altered life in Britain. The movement of goods became faster and more reliable. The working and middle classes gained unprecedented access to travel, and national markets and ideas began to flow more freely. Victorian-era travelers passed through Euston's halls dressed in their finest, surrounded by intricate ironwork, arched windows, and bustling porters, a new social theater set in motion by steam. But as decades passed and modern demands began to outpace the old infrastructure, the station's Victorian charm was increasingly seen as obsolete. By the mid-20th century, Euston was considered inefficient, cramped, and outdated. British Railways, eyeing modernization and uniformity, made a fateful decision. In the early 1960s, despite significant public resistance, the original Euston station, including the majestic arch, was slated for demolition. The outcry from architects, historians, and the public was immense. Yet the government proceeded, arguing that progress demanded sacrifice. In 1962, the Euston Arch was dismantled and removed, its stones unceremoniously dumped into a canal in East London. The Victorian station was replaced with a utilitarian concrete and glass complex, embodying the stark modernist vision of post-war Britain. The loss of the Euston Arch remains one of the most controversial moments in the history of British architectural preservation. It galvanized a growing heritage movement and led to the formation of organizations dedicated to protecting the nation's historical structures. To many, it was a warning, a symbol of how easily history could be erased in the name of efficiency. The new Euston station, opened in 1968, served its purpose, but never captured the imagination or admiration of the public. It functioned more as a transit hub than a civic landmark, its gray exterior a shadow of the grandeur it had replaced. Yet history, like rail, runs in loops. In recent years, Euston has found itself once again at the center of national transformation. With the advent of HS2, High Speed 2, the controversial new high-speed rail line connecting London to Birmingham and beyond, Euston is undergoing a monumental redevelopment. The project has drawn criticism and praise in equal measure. On one hand, it promises faster travel times, reduced congestion, and economic revitalization. On the other, it has required the demolition of entire neighborhoods, sparked protests from environmentalists and residents, and reignited debates about the future of rail in Britain. Euston has become a construction site once more, its future taking shape amidst cranes, scaffolding, and uncertainty. As part of the redevelopment, there have been serious proposals to reconstruct the Euston Arch. Miraculously, many of its stones were recovered from the canal decades after they were discarded, and public support for restoring the arch as a historical centerpiece of the new station has grown steadily. The movement to resurrect the arch is not just about nostalgia. It's about healing a wound in Britain's architectural soul. It's about bridging the past and the future, showing that progress and preservation can coexist. If rebuilt, the arch will once again stand at the gateway to London's rail network, a powerful symbol of resilience and reverence for what came before. Today, as commuters race through Euston's corridors, few stop to consider the ground they walk on. Beneath the concrete and signage lie layers of stories, of Victorian engineers and modern protesters, of demolished beauty and planned rebirth. Euston is not merely a station. It's a palimpsest of Britain's railway history, each era writing over the last, yet never fully erasing what came before. Its story continues to evolve, shaped by politics, progress, and public memory. Euston Station, from its soaring arch to its buried stones, from steam locomotives to high-speed trains, has always been more than a destination. It is a reflection of how Britain sees itself, proud of its past, conflicted in its present, and still daring to imagine a future built on rails. The next chapter is already being written, and just like in 1837, it begins at Euston. In the heart of Birmingham, just beyond the modern glass towers and redeveloped canals, stands a building that seems almost out of place. Its grand neoclassical facade frozen in time, echoing an age when steam and stone first reshaped Britain's destiny. This is Birmingham Curzon Street Station, opened in 1838, and one of the oldest surviving railway termini in the world. It stands not just as a relic, but as a rare architectural survivor of the railway's birth. A building that has witnessed nearly 2 centuries of evolution, decline, and now, astonishing revival. Constructed as the northern terminus of the London and Birmingham Railway, it played a crucial role in linking the industrial heartland of England to its capital, creating a new artery for commerce, travel, and transformation. The London and Birmingham Railway, engineered by George Stephenson, was one of the great pioneering trunk lines of the early 19th century. It brought together 2 of the country's most vital cities, traversing challenging landscapes and introducing a new level of precision in railway construction. When the line reached Birmingham, the site chosen for its terminus was Curzon Street, on the eastern fringe of the city. The station's design was entrusted to Philip Hardwick, the same architect who had designed the original Euston Arch in London. His vision for Curzon Street was bold and unmistakably grand, a Greek Revival masterpiece built of ashlar stone, complete with fluted Ionic columns, symmetrical proportions, and a commanding portico that gave it the appearance of a temple rather than a train station. It was a building meant to impress, to celebrate this brave new world of mechanical travel. Curzon Street Station opened to great fanfare in 1838, with its elegant design serving as both a civic landmark and a functional terminal. The trains that arrived from London pulled into sidings behind the main structure, where passengers disembarked and entered the station through a wide open yard. Unlike the sprawling multi-platform stations of today, early rail terminals like Curzon Street were relatively modest in scale. Yet what they lacked in size, they made up for in ambition. This was not just a place to board a train, it was an introduction to the future. The journey between London and Birmingham had been reduced from a 2-day ordeal to around 5 hours, and soon, even faster. It changed how people worked, lived, and interacted. For Birmingham, Curzon Street meant access to new markets, new people, and a new kind of national identity. As the railway network expanded, Curzon Street continued to operate both passenger and freight services, becoming a key node in the web of mid-19th century British rail travel. But like Crown Street Station before it, Curzon Street's role in passenger transport was eventually eclipsed by newer, more centrally located infrastructure. In 1854, just 16 years after opening, the larger and better positioned Birmingham New Street Station took over as the city's main passenger hub. Curzon Street ceased handling passengers and was repurposed almost entirely for freight. Its yards bustled with goods trains carrying coal, textiles, and industrial components, critical cargo for a rapidly urbanizing nation. Over the next 100 years, the station served this quieter but no less important role. As decades passed, and freight transport shifted increasingly to road vehicles, Curzon Street fell into disuse. By the late 20th century, the building had been largely abandoned. Its classical facade became a lonely monument surrounded by derelict land and forgotten railway remnants. The once grand portico stood with broken windows, faded stone, and graffiti-covered walls. Most people in Birmingham didn't know its name, let alone its significance. Yet the structure remained intact, one of the only original mainline terminal buildings from the 1830s still standing. It was designated a Grade 1 listed building in 1952, ensuring its protection. But preservation didn't mean use. For years, it sat in architectural limbo, respected but irrelevant. That all changed with the dawn of HS2, the high-speed 2 rail project designed to connect London with the Midlands and Northern England in a fraction of current travel times, needed a Birmingham terminus. In a twist of history no one had anticipated, Curzon Street was selected, not to be demolished, but to be reborn. The new Birmingham Curzon Street station, currently under construction, will become one of the most advanced rail hubs in Europe. A futuristic complex of steel, glass, and sustainable materials will rise around the historic Hardwick building, which will be restored and incorporated into the design. Where steam once hissed, electric trains will glide. Where classical columns once welcomed Victorian travelers, future generations will walk through smart terminals and into carbon-neutral trains traveling at over 200 miles per hour. The symbolism of Curzon Street's rebirth cannot be overstated. It links the earliest days of rail innovation with the next chapter in high-speed connectivity. It speaks to the resilience of good architecture, of cultural memory, and of cities willing to embrace their past as they race toward the future. The HS2 station will serve as both a transportation hub and a cultural landmark, with the restored neoclassical building potentially used as an exhibition space or visitor center. It will be a place where history and progress meet under one roof, telling the story of how Britain was shaped by the train and continues to be. Today, the area around Curzon Street buzzes with cranes and concrete mixers, scaffolding and sparks. Yet, the original portico still stands, dignified amid the chaos, as if watching patiently for the next train to arrive. For a building that was nearly forgotten, its role in 21st century Britain may end up being even greater than what it played in the 19th. Birmingham is once again on the verge of transformation, and the station that first welcomed the rails into the city will now greet a new generation of travelers. It's a moment of poetic symmetry, one that honors both origin and evolution. Curzon Street Station, then, is not merely an old building. It is a mirror held up to the past and a doorway into the future. Its stones have seen the rise of steam, the shift to freight, the abandonment of industry, and now the rebirth of high-speed travel. Few places can claim to have played so many roles in so many centuries and still stand ready for the next. In the global history of train stations, Curzon Street is a quiet giant, less famous than Grand Central or Gare du Nord perhaps, but no less significant. It reminds us that innovation is not just about what we build next, but about how we honor what we built first. From stone to steel, these stations built the world we know. They were more than points of departure or arrival. They were the architecture of transformation, chiseled into the urban fabric of cities and into the memory of civilization itself. Each of these 5 stations, whether still standing proud or reduced to whispers beneath the earth, marked a turning point in human movement. Mount Clare, where American rail travel took its first breath. Liverpool Road, where intercity travel was born. Crown Street, the prototype that vanished too soon but left its mark forever. Euston, the giant that rose, fell, and now rises again. Curzon Street, the neoclassical phoenix bridging the age of steam with the age of speed. Together, they form a timeline of innovation, boldness, and the sheer will to connect a world had, until then, remained separate. Preserving transport history isn't just about saving old buildings or rusted tracks. It's about holding on to the stories of how we got here, about remembering the courage it took to build what had never been built before. These stations are time machines in their own right. They allow us to step into the shoes of our ancestors, to hear the first whistles, feel the tremble of steam engines underfoot, and witness the birth of mass mobility. In an era obsessed with what's next, faster speeds, sleeker designs, greener energy, these places root us in the lessons of what came before. They remind us that every great leap forward began with someone daring to lay down the first mile of rail, to draw the first timetable, to open the first set of gates to the public. Time doesn't stop. Trains now glide silently where once they thundered. Cities grow, industries shift, and what was once revolutionary becomes routine. But places like Mount Clare, Liverpool Road, and Curzon Street help us remember how it all began. They are living evidence that progress doesn't erase the past. It builds upon it. And as we move into an era of hyperconnectivity and high-speed transit, let us not forget the platforms that started it all. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the forgotten giants of rail history, give the video a thumbs up, drop a comment on which station fascinated you most, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories that shaped our world, one track at a time.